and welcome to the very first episode for 2026 of our Ultimate Supply Chain podcast. I'm Lou Barber, and today we are delighted to be recording here in the Post Tower in Bonn, the DHL headquarters. As we kick off the new year, supply chains are firmly back at the centre of the conversation, not just as operational engines, but as strategic drivers of growth, resilience, and of course of competitive advantage. So in that context, I'm delighted to be joined today by Andries Retief, who is our Chief Development Officer here at DHL Supply Chain. And today we are going to explore what is shaping supply chains in 2026, from growth and customer expectations right the way through to resilience, regional expansion, and leadership in supply chains. Andries, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Lou. Great to be here.
So, Andries, before we get into the questions, tell us a bit about you. What sparked your passion for supply chains? How did it all start and how did you end up here?
Lou, I'm afraid I don't have a very good backstory as to how I ended up in supply chain. I think it sort of happened by accident. I was really pulled in initially by wanting to work for an organization that has global relevance.
Mm-hmm.
And the DHL brand is well known globally, and that was, if I'm honest, the first trigger about saying I'd like to work for an organization like that.
Right.
I wasn't very afraid and very comfortable necessarily with talking extensively about supply chains. I had to learn as I go.
Mm-hmm.
And now 17 years later, I'm still in DHL and I'm still in supply chains, and I'm a little bit more comfortable to talk about it, at least by now. So that I hope also comes through in the rest of the podcast. But it wasn't a very well planned, deliberate direction to go into. But I'm super happy that I have gone into the direction of supply chains because, I mean, how fascinating. There's so much that we can talk about in the worlds of supply chain.
And what you say isn't surprising. So many of the guests that we've had on the podcast have said, I didn't study supply chains. I'm not from a logistics background. I've ended up here and I love it. So I think it's something people come to. They seem to, if you love it, you stay, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm an accountant by trade. So I've got a finance background and started my career in DHL in finance. And over time that evolved into various roles until being in the role that I am today.
Finance has got a lot to answer for. I started in finance too.
Well, there you go.
There you go. One day adding up, next day colouring in.
Exactly.
So let's look back then. When did you realise that supply chains aren't just operational, but can be strategic growth levers?
I think that was probably towards the middle part of my career in DHL. So I'd say I've been here for 17 years. I'd say 9 years ago. So just about before the COVID pandemic.
Right.
When I started to also understand that its impact on our customers a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
And when I could spend time extensively with customers, hear their voice, and understand why they have positioned supply chain as front and center part of their own organizational strategies, and realizing that in a well-functioning supply chain, you can make such a big difference to those plans and to the actual customer's customer. And that for me was part of what inspired me to then get even a deeper knowledge. It partially took me out of finance at the time. I started to really get involved in operational activities, learning really closely what do we do day to day, and seeing the power of supply chains through working with our operational teams on the ground was really inspiring.
It does feel like COVID might have been a pivotal moment in so many things, but particularly for supply chain. I think of my time before COVID and since then. Before COVID, people did refer to us as the people who look after trucks and sheds.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like perhaps COVID showed people the importance of supply chain and the real life impact that supply chains have on the world.
I used to say that prior to COVID, I would have to explain to my family, what am I doing in supply chain?
Yep.
During COVID, it was on the front page of the newspaper.
Every day.
And it almost made that part of the job a lot easier when it came to family gatherings. I didn't have to explain my role. They understood supply chains. And I think, that's a bit of an example of, I think, what a lot of us experienced through the COVID times. And And then that really increased the impact of and the importance of supply chains in organizations, because we started to really understand the power that it has in terms of reaching, in influencing customer experience, reaching strategic goals, and honestly, just keep the world running.
Has it changed some of the decisions you've made as a leader, having that slightly different profile for supply chains?
Oh, for sure. I think I've moved much beyond just focusing on how do we really just deliver the task at hand, which is of course still essential. We need to make sure we execute on the tactical side of things, but it's made me lift up my eyes and just look a little bit further ahead, trying to be much more in touch with market dynamics, as I said already, voices of the customers that we work with. And that in itself shapes and influences the decisions we take internally, but also the way in which we position DHL as an organization, but supply chains as a whole in the industry.
So you're fairly new to your role as Chief Development Officer. What surprised you most in your first 90 days?
It doesn't feel so new anymore, by the way. It's really funny how quickly 90 days go when you really hit the ground running and you get stuck in, which those that know me would know that's absolutely part of my personality. I sometimes can't help myself. But I think what surprised me most, it's probably not so much of a surprise, but what's really intrigued me a lot has been the level of demand that our customers have for saying, please help us shape the future of our organizations. And please remember that supply chain is at the heart of that. So even if you're not a supply chain organization per se, you manufacture a product, you distribute products, you might be life-saving drugs or whatever industry you're in. But the influence and the impact of supply chain, I think I've understood that before the role, but it's really elevated it to the next level for me once we started to have even more top-to-top engagements. So it felt really powerful.
And have you seen any particular sectors, customer sectors, that are more inclined to be asking you those strategic questions than others?
In a way, every sector has that on the agenda.
Yeah.
Certain sectors come at it from different angles. And I think we continue to see a real strong push around our life science and healthcare sector, e-commerce sector, new energy as a sector, data centers as a sector or a subsector, depending on their definition. These continue to be sectors where the customer demand for driving excellence and driving that competitive advantage through supply chain is front and center in the conversation. Absolutely.
And look, just my own observation of your first 90 days, I see you on our internal social media, I see you on external social media. You're spending a tremendous amount of time out in the field with our customers. What feedback are you getting from them, and what are they telling you is important both now and looking into 2026?
We're getting a lot of conversations with customers at the moment about a couple of key themes as we go through these discussions, right? One is, I think supply chains are still very much a core component of building a resilient organization. So ensuring that we can provide customers with that level of resilience in a world that is in many ways incredibly volatile and incredibly dynamic. So that focus on resilience is super important. There is a big discussion on many forums around how do we make the best use of technology, robotics, innovation, which again fits 100% also with the DHL agenda at the moment. So that is a really productive and constructive conversation that we have with customers. It's impossible to have a conversation about supply chains without also talking about making sure that we do this in a way that is cost competitive, that is really conscious of the total cost of ownership, and that the entire cost end-to-end across the entire supply chain, that we make sure we focus on that with customers so that that element of cost competitiveness is integral. And then we also have a lot of conversations with customers around how do we ensure that the work that we do in the supply chain really addresses the environmental question, and in terms of driving the green agenda, making sure we decarbonize as far as we possibly can in a way that is sustainable also commercially.
Yeah.
And I think that is a conversation that we continue to have with customers, and I expect that it will continue in 2026.
And have those trends and demands changed over the last 5-7 years?
Yeah, I would say they have. I think if I reflect back on, maybe take it even slightly longer than your 5 to 7 year window and make it 7 to 10, I would probably divide it into 3 broad areas. I think 10 years ago, the supply chain was very much just around, it's in the background, as I've said already. How do we make it as cheap and as low, as least disruptive as possible?
Yeah.
So it was all about the cost. Make it cheap and make sure it doesn't cause us any problems. COVID forced us into a space where it was around, make sure it works and it's resilient and the world is upside down. How do we really drive a sense of resilience, which is also what I spoke about earlier. So that was the second phase, I would say. Now we are having a conversation that says, how does the supply chain give me a competitive edge?
Yeah.
So how does it actually enable growth ahead of market, ahead of my competitor? And I have to admit, I mean, all 3 of those conversations in their own right have a place. But clearly the growth conversation at the moment and at the beginning of 2026 is incredibly exciting to have. And you can't have the growth conversation without being conscious of the resilience component that I spoke about and of the cost component that I've spoken about. But talking about how do I get a competitive edge is a big part of what we do at the moment.
Let's explore that. So when you're talking to customers about how supply chains can enable growth, what do you say?
I think supply chains enables growth when you are able to support the customer with understanding what is their customer's need. And that is, as DHL, is something that we are very conscious of at the moment, is that at the end of every product that we handle, every delivery that we make, there is an end consumer. And understanding those behaviors and using that incredible amount of data also to the benefit of our customers in order to support them with their own decision-making around how they position their brands in the market, how we can optimize the flows for them as a result of the data that we have available, how we then use the best practices in the industry that to a large extent we are part of pioneering as DHL Supply Chain. I think these are some of the things that we then put in place to help customers get that competitive edge. And I think that's something we'll continue to do here.
And do you feel customers open themselves to using our data and sharing their data with us to enable that growth? I can think of a time where people were very precious about their data.
Yeah, it comes a lot down to the mutual trust that you've built up over years in a relationship. I think in those cases where there is a clear way of working that is built on a good foundation of mutual trust, it's easier. It also is not only reliant on having had a relationship over a long term. It's also about having a similar outlook of what are the strategic objectives that we want to achieve here. You know, a shared set of values, a shared sense of the direction we want to travel in, and understanding that in order for this destination that we all see is possible, for this to be reached, there needs to be really good two-way collaboration.
Yeah.
Then it's beyond data. Then it comes to resource sharing, best practice sharing, data sharing, mutual value. Is a really key part of the conversation. And when you get to that level, the conversation has gone beyond the tactical to those really strategic value-adding conversations.
And do you have to position that, or are customers coming to you and asking for that level of relationship, that level of collaboration?
As DHL and the brand that we carry and the reputation that we have in the market, when we engage with a customer, customers expect that from us from day one.
Okay.
And for me, that is part of the exciting part of working for the organization. But it is incredibly clear that customers engage logistics industry leaders like ourselves because they expect that level of engagement from day one.
Let's explore customer expectations in general. Where do you see customer expectations changing fastest right now?
I think what we're seeing is that the days where customers are simply asking, move a product from A to B. Of course, that still happens at times, but that is really, really reduced in terms of expectation from a customer. Customer expectations at the moment sits in terms of saying, engage with me in a way that really unlocks the strategic value of my organization by bringing to us your best practices, DHL, your industry-leading engineering capabilities, innovation capabilities, your thinking around how do we do this in a way that is environmentally responsible. So, and these 3 or 4 things that I've just mentioned now, they are key pillars of customers' own strategies.
Yeah.
And they want organizations like ourselves and the supply chains in general to address that, not simply look at it as a commodity.
Yeah.
And that's a big shift. And the speed of change in that area is as fast as it's ever been.
So if a customer says to you today, manage my operations, is that substantively different to what they meant by manage my operations 5 years ago?
Yes or no, and I'll tell you why I say that. I think 5 years ago it was about make sure you get the product out the door, and there were some hygiene factors in there that were talking about do it in a way that obviously continues to respect health and safety expectations, regulatory requirements, focus on costs, as I've said already. None of that has changed. We've added to it, and that's where the changes come. So the foundational level of saying the entry ticket to the game, as I'd like to call it, is still that every operation needs to run in a way, and as DHL we also take this incredibly seriously, that in a way that is safe, safe workplace.
Number one.
That ensures that we comply to regulatory environment, that ensures that we do the work in a way that makes sure we deliver on KPIs. That hasn't changed. It's about saying, how do we now go beyond that? And to my earlier point, use data to make that supply chain more efficient. Do it in a way that uses technology, automate it, which would further create optimization in from a cost perspective and increase the experience of employees in the warehouse. And customers generally care about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So shifting the focus a little, in a world that seems to be increasingly global,
Yeah.
are we heading towards global standardization, or are we looking for more localization, or a bit of both?
I think we want a bit of both. And I think we're seeing that more and more. Globalization is here to stay. I don't believe at all that globalization will fall away. But I do think we also have the additional component of regionalization or localization in order to make sure that we create more resilience in the supply chain. When we look at omni-sourcing, that gives us the opportunity for customers to say, I'm not overly dependent on one single location for where my product comes from. So I can rely on multiple sources as an example of that. Now within that, then you need to create regional supply chains that supports that customer need. So I would say you have both. And it adds to the complexity of what it takes to run a supply chain these days. But again, that complexity means customers are more and more relying on experts, and supply chain organizations like ourselves are then even more essential as part of executing customer strategy.
And the availability of the data that supports fueling their strategies and adding value to those strategies.
Absolutely.
I mean, we've come a long way since trucks and sheds, right?
Absolutely, and I think it's really exciting. If I was someone entering the industry at this point in time compared to when I did so 17 years ago, I think the opportunities available to work in this industry are just so many more than what they used to be. I remember being a youngster entering the organization, being surprised at the fact that we employ pharmacists, which clearly makes sense because we run very sophisticated life science and healthcare operations. But these days, I mean, that is really standard. And now if you want to work with data, if you want to work with automation, robotics, state-of-the-art robotics, supply chain is a place where you can do that.
Definitely.
And I think that is really exciting.
My daughter's best friend has just graduated, got a master's in supply chain management.
Yeah.
And when you have conversations with her, it's fascinating.
Absolutely.
And I can't imagine that 10 years ago.
Absolutely. It's really fun.
Risk. Bringing us down to a risk. Which are the risks within supply chains what keeps you awake at night around supply chain risk?
Yeah, I think no answer in this case is complete without at some point talking about cybersecurity. I think it is omnipresent. We know that. You try and protect against that risk as much as you can, but you know that risk never goes away completely. So I'm very proud of the work that DHL does in that space, and the industry recognizes that in terms of protecting us against some sort of cyber event. But it never goes away completely, and we do see recently, even in media, the incredible impact it has on an organization when they're on the receiving end of these cases. So it will always be something that's at the back of your mind.
Yeah, and if we look at it the other way, the opposite of risk, I guess, is resilience to a certain extent. Many companies talk about resilience and then optimize for costs. What does resilience look like at scale?
I think the first thing we need to address is to say those two concepts, cost optimization and resilience, they're not mutually exclusive, right? We cannot pretend to live in a world where we don't care about cost because we all have to be super resilient. And equally, we cannot only care about the cost, and hence we don't care about the resilience. So I think firstly, accepting that there is a balance to be struck between the two. In the end, we are here to make sure that business runs in the best way possible. And as DHL Supply Chain, that's also at the core of what we want our customers to achieve, is run successful businesses. So the resilience component of that is really ensuring that we have done all the checks and balances to as far as one possibly can when it comes to business continuity plans. That is a real basic, but it's so often overlooked. That ensures that we have thought of the various potential events that could happen, and we have made a conscious effort to address proactively a plan for each and every one of those. And again, when I talk about it to you now, it sounds rather obvious, but to do so at scale across the nearly 2,000 locations that we operate globally is a very, very big task.
It's a big ask.
But that is what we do. And that is also what customers expect for us, especially global customers that operate in multiple locations. So I think this is just a very first step to it. The second one, of course, I would say, is to make sure that one always stays up to date and at the forefront of what the potential disruptions could be. There we use tools like Trend Radar, which in itself is something that we actively invest in to ensure we can understand what are the big trends that are out there and how they will impact or disrupt the supply chain industry.
Yeah.
So I think, again, understanding those things are important, and then using them as tools to manage events as and when they happen is really part of the game.
So you've started to wander into that area of scenario planning. How important do our customers feel scenario planning is?
Lately, every customer I speak to would ask me a question about what if.
Right.
And again, I think the fact that a couple of these more prominent events have made headlines in media and have really had incredibly devastating impacts on very large organizations of the world have put it at the front of our minds. I think COVID started it.
Yeah.
And subsequently, it transformed into beyond just something like a pandemic, but also cybersecurity, tariffs, global geopolitical events. I think these have all impacted customer mindset. And now we have conversation that says, what if this event happens? How would you react? Our job and our commitment is to say, we will try and find answers to those questions.
I guess this is a great example of where digital and AI have become intrinsic in supply chains beyond just the automation of tasks.
Yeah, I think those are key tools that we use as part of the toolkit to help us to build up this resilience for customers. Absolutely. Yeah.
And those scenarios, are you starting to see not just the use of scenario planning as a defense against risk, but a positive means of making decisions and driving growth?
Yes, because if you can get that scenario planning and that resilience component, if you can get it right, then when these events happen that got an industry-wide impact, clearly for companies that have got that in the toolkit ready to use,
Ahead of the game.
that puts them a step ahead, if not 3 steps ahead of the game. So that's why resilience is not just about protecting what you have, it's also about getting a competitive edge.
Yeah, optimizing opportunities
Absolutely.
as well as protecting from risk, for sure. So moving towards regional expansion, you have spoken at length, certainly internally, about regional expansion, including the Middle East emerging as a global trade hub. What did 2025 teach us about how we scale regionally?
But tongue in cheek, that is sometimes harder than you think. But no, also that if you want to regionally expand, or if you want to double down on a specific region because of the macro factors that sit behind that, you've got to have a good plan. And I think that has been really well done within the DHL organization over especially the last 12 to 18 months to say, we analyze the macro trends, we understand where the world is going from that regard. In that regard, let's invest in a certain area ahead of need. We've done that now in the Middle East, and yes, it's hard work, but it is also exactly in line with what our customers have asked from us. And maybe one thing that I would say to add to your question in terms of what have we learned from it is, you cannot make business decisions if you are not close to your customers and you understand their voice. Because in the end, we have a business because we have customers. And taking that feedback, getting that inputs, help us to make the right strategic decisions. And in this case, helps us to then say, where's the right location to invest? The Middle East is that space. Let's go ahead and do so.
So are there any operational capabilities that you feel need to be in place before that sort of expansion can be in place?
Yeah, I think if you just broadly look at what is at the heart of that expansion, what are the 3 key pillars on which we've built that expansion plan? One is first and foremost to say, as a supply chain organization, and at the core of what we do is still warehousing and transportation, do we have the right space and the right transportation network in the right location to support customers? So that investment ahead of need in warehouse space, in a footprint expansion, is absolutely key, because that then gives customers the confidence that there is actual availability of warehouse space, there is a transportation network, and they can utilize that to serve their customers and to distribute their products. So the first element for us was to make sure that we have that investment in the right footprint. The second one was, in the end, we need to remember our supply chain business is still a business that is very focused on having the right capabilities and skills. We're a people's business. We like to say that internally, as you know. So making that investment in terms of the right level of capability, all the way from the management team to the operational teams and all the various subject matter experts in that chain, is another component of what we do when we talk about a regional expansion or investment ahead of need. So made a very clear investment on people, and then we've spoken about it already quite a bit, but making sure that we invest also in technology, because in the world that we live in today, having the right system capability, having the right ability to use innovation, specifically robotics, how we treat data, this is what are the key enablers, together with our engineering capabilities, to then provide customer with the services that they're looking for. And if you put those 3 together, you end up having space in the right location, with skilled people, with the right tools, and then you can run a business.
So let's focus a bit on those people and in particular leadership capability. What do you think will matter most for supply chain leaders over the next few years?
I think supply chain leaders there's a lot on their plates, as we've spoken already about this incredibly dynamic, volatile world that supply chain leaders are at the moment navigating. So you could probably come up with quite a long list, but I think the one key component here would be to say, how do I focus on the right priorities in a world that is incredibly dynamic? But almost more importantly than that, how do I ensure that when I make a decision to move from one priority to another, that I get my team to move with me? As DHL, we're also very proud of the fact that we don't build a culture on a single person. We don't do, we call it a hero culture. We don't do that, and the real strength of the organization, of any supply chain organization, sits in the organization all pulling in the same direction, being on the same page. And in a world that's incredibly volatile, leaders are forced at the moment to switch between priorities all the time. And I think the way in which you're able to take your team with you while doing so is going to be the difference between saying, is this sustainable or not? And I think that's a leadership quality that I really look for when I speak to teams and which we discuss also amongst my peers. Something I would look towards in this year.
So that's a leadership capability that goes beyond supply chain expertise. And just the last few days, we've had the executive leadership commitments and training discussions here in DHL. Without being too unfair, are we prepared for it?
I think we are. I think we are more than ever. I think as an organization, we've been incredibly aware of the fact that there's an important balance to be struck. It's even ingrained in our organizational values. There's an incredibly important balance to be struck between respect and results.
Yeah.
And what I've just described is to say we will always be results focused. It's important for leaders to make decisions that switch from one topic to another, and that has got that ambidexterity to move as needed. But at the same time, take the team with you, show them the respect, spend the time explaining decisions, understand that communication is also about listening, not just about telling. And I have to say, the reason I've been with this organization for as long as I have been is because I've always felt like that balance is quite well achieved. And I think that sets us up well as an organization for the future.
So a couple of things as we wrap up then, Andries. Are there any myths about supply chain that you would like to bust here and now for anybody thinking about taking a career in supply chains?
It's not just trucks and warehouses. It obviously is also trucks and warehouses, but you and I come from finance backgrounds and we work in supply chain for as long as we have. And I spoke earlier about how many different career paths you could have within supply chain. So supply chain is incredibly diverse, and as I said already, it's incredibly enriching also on a personal level when you learn about it and when you then apply your trade in whichever part of the supply chain you fit. So please do not simplify supply chain to just trucks and warehouses. It's really not just that.
Fair enough. And if you were to leave supply chain leaders with one piece of advice?
The future is going to require from every supply chain leader to be flexible, to think on their feet, to be agile, but as I said already, to make sure in the process of that, take the organization, take the team that you work with, take them with you. Because in the end, the sustainability, the long-term future of your supply chain relies on the technical capabilities of organizations like ours, relies on working with world-class partners like DHL, but it also requires everyone between supplier or vendor as well as customer to be on the same page. Make sure we get everybody on the same page, because then the power of supply chain is really, really strong.
So that to me sounds like an exciting a challenge of leadership rather than a challenge around trucks and sheds. And I think that is a brilliant way to summarise our meeting today. Andries, thanks so much for spending the time with us. I found it fascinating. It's great to hear your thoughts on your career so far, but also your ideas about where the future might take us.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks everyone for dialing in. As usual, please leave us your comments. Tell us what you'd like us to cover in future editions. Thank you so much for being with us.